Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to discussing how to develop an asset-based approach to language teaching in what we hope to be a very interactive session today. So I'm Julie Lake, and my partner in crime, who you see, is Heather Weger. And so there we go. So I like to start all of my classes and workshops with a moment of silence. It is, in my mind, a moment of liberation. So whether we're monolingual or we're multilingual, we're juggling a lot of information in our daily lives. Multilinguals are operating in several languages, which can be frankly quite exhausting. And we're all switching between tasks and settings. So take a moment to breathe and to rest and to land. Notice who's in the room and do what you need to do to get ready to receive this information and to offer it in the session today. Okay, let's get started. So our agenda for today is to discuss the relevant literature that inspired and motivated our presentation. We'll outline the 3 steps towards an asset-based approach, and then we'll present and discuss scenarios that Heather and I have experienced. And you'll also get a chance to discuss your own teaching experience and reflect on it. So we wanted to share our inspiration for this presentation. We need more purposeful language instruction in the field of English language teaching. And this has become more and more clear as the field has developed. So in response, the language teaching field has moved from a deficit-based model to an asset-based model of instruction. And this asset-based model recognizes the benefits of being multilingual in many settings, including academic and occupational ones. This movement is aligned with research showing that students learn better when they're more empowered and integrated into their learning, and that we as teachers, to better involve our students, need to recognize our own positionality in the classroom, which relates to the different identities that we present to each other and to our students. Now, the impact on our presentation is that we as presenters are not the experts here. As our audience, we hope to co-create this presentation with you. And therefore, the format is somewhat non-traditional. We really wanted to shake it up a little bit. We're going to present some scenarios to you where we noticed our own biases, our own assumptions, our own blind spots. And we're going to ask you questions, and then you'll get a chance to reflect on your own teaching practices as well. So in this session, you're going to learn about a 3-stage reflection-based process to help you, 1, develop an awareness of any possible linguicism inherent in your classrooms, and 2, to explore an asset-based pedagogy with a social justice focus. So in stage 1, hold on a second, there we go. It's a little slow on the uptake here. The key word is accountability partners. So Heather and I rely on each other as accountability partners to engage in honest and frank discussions about our pedagogical approaches to teaching English in the classroom. In stage 2, the key words are analysis and reflection. So we use several strategies to analyze our teaching practices and better understand our positionality in the classroom, which relates to our race, our class, our gender identity, our sexual preference, whether we're able or not, and so on. And we do this by rewatching classroom videos, journaling, and debriefing post-class, and attending professional development workshops. Now, by looking at this closed circuit classroom and how it fits within the larger global community, we've started to create a fuller picture of our students' language needs and the culture of our institution. In stage 3, the keywords are student partners. So we view our students as partners in the learning experience, co-creating a curriculum with them that meets their linguistic needs. And then they get to make informed choices and be more empowered as active learners. So now I'll turn things over to Heather, who's going to talk about stage 1.
So we'll start with an example to illustrate how having an accountability partner is a foundational stage of a reflection-based process. So note that the accountability relationship that Julie and I have actually evolved as a natural part of being trapped together in our teaching context, where we co-plan and co-design virtually all of our teaching materials for our class. And we even talk about the exact words we might say to students as we deliver information. And over time, as we developed a sense of shared mission and shared experiences, we realized that part of the function we filled for each other was to be a safe space to consider the hidden biases and sometimes not so hidden biases in our own teaching. And while this relationship built up over several semesters, today's example is recent. It's from a class that we co-taught together earlier this year. So let's consider an example of one specific classroom event to demonstrate what accountability partners might look like. First, I'll give you a bit of context. In the classroom that day were 40 multilingual students from a variety of nations. And we were co-teaching that day, meaning that Julie and I were both present in the classroom at the same time. In addition, I'll give you a little information about their assignment. The students were gathering that day to spend most of their time on a timed writing task. It was only the second class of the semester, but it was also the first time that students were meeting together as a group cohort for our class. So most of the times students met in smaller sections, but for this class, we were all meeting as one big happy family. In our presentation today, I want to focus on our pre-writing discussion groups. In the pre-writing discussion groups, we wanted students to share knowledge about their country's legal systems before we asked them to write about it. So I have a reflection question for you, and it's basically, how would you group students for this activity under these conditions? What are the pedagogical questions that you would ask yourself as you made the choice of how to group students? Well, Julie and I chose to mix students from different sections, but we put them in groups whenever possible with colleagues from the same country. The primary reason we made this choice was to give students a chance to get information, share information about their own legal systems with people from the same country, since a given student may not have much legal experience for the particular legal topic that we were dealing with that day. In this context, I actually made 2 mistakes. And I do see that quick question. The class was in person. This was an in-person class. So all 42 people in the room, 40 students and 2 faculty members. So I made at least 2 mistakes that day, I should say. I was aware of one of the mistakes, like as it was happening. When I was going over the instructions with the students, and you see the instructions on the screen, I ad-libbed, hey guys, be sure to speak only English in your groups. And my brain was like, wait. I'm not actually opposed to using a native language or a dominant language in the classroom, but basically that is what I just said. Outwardly, I just plunged ahead with class rather than trying to correct my ill-chosen words. So basically, I just reinforced a flawed but common ideology that one's native language or home language or preferred language is a deficit, when in fact it is an asset for a multilingual student. As my accountability partner, when Julie and I were debriefing later that day after class, we discussed the situation, which she had also noticed, and we talked about what a more asset-based approach to the situation would have been. If my brain could have operated fast enough, it would have been more affirming to say something like, since you're going to have to write about this topic in English, this is a good chance to practice talking about this topic in English so that you can help your brain begin to think about the English vocabulary and grammar resources that you're going to need for our writing task. Julie was also able, as my accountability partner, to point out a second mistake that I hadn't noticed. And that's when the students were very first coming into class, the 40 of them rushing in and finding their seats, which were all over the place. I made an off-the-cuff remark saying, oh, you're over here in the Chinese group, or oh, you're over here in the Saudi Arabian group. And such generalizations minimize the full complexities of our students' multilingual identities. So in short, having an accountability partner is a way to help you recognize when it would be better to make a different choice. Whether you have a formal or informal accountability partner, the core principle is that it's in a community that you can brainstorm solutions and unpack your experiences.
Now I'm going to show an example that demonstrates the second stage, which is self-analysis of teaching styles to identify how identity influences our approach to teaching. And in this particular example, I'll be talking about feedback as well. So the context of this example is a writing skills class that I taught in 2019 for multilingual international lawyers pursuing a master's degree in law, which is called an LLM degree. And the assignment was to write a scholarly paper about a legal issue in the student's country. The assumption that I made, the assumptions that I made was a comment writing teachers often make: consider your audience. You need to provide more explanation or information. But before I jump ahead, let me show you what happened. So a student from Saudi Arabia wrote a paper about a legal tool that's called suspension of services in Saudi Arabia that gets people to pay their debts. And if you skim this excerpt, you'll see that the writer used the word we. So my comment was, who is we? Recall that your audience is a mix of Saudi and non-Saudi lawyers. You need to write about this from a neutral perspective. That's a very loaded term, neutral. See in-text suggested changes. Please avoid other instances of we in the paper. Just notice the tone of that comment. I mean, I took this directly from a paper, from a feedback that I gave. So I offered these changes. So instead of these underlying instances of we, so we cannot achieve justice, I offered Saudi Arabia cannot achieve justice. Instead of we, when we impose unfairness, I said it imposes unfairness. Now, when we share these slides later, I wanted to point out there's a link to an NPR podcast called Code Switch, if you're familiar with it, which discusses what they call the explanatory comma. And they really address this issue in a really thought-provoking way that I found very useful for my own teaching. So if you like podcasts, you could feel free to check it out. Now, over time, I've started to interrogate this assumption that I am somehow a standard reader who requires information, who gets to decide what's required. And I've started to ask myself questions like, who is this assumed audience? And who has the privilege of receiving this needed information, and who doesn't receive this privilege? What information is not privileged? And furthermore, who gets to decide? And this leads me to ask, who are the in-group members and who are the out-group members? Who is this text aimed at? If you're already in the know, how does it feel to get this kind of explanation? For example, if you were a Saudi reader who read the text with my changes, what would you think? Would you think this text is meant for me or this text is meant for someone else? And finally, as teachers, what information do we assume everyone should know? And more importantly, why? I would argue that these questions are valuable and they get at the different identities that I have in my life and in the classroom. So as a white USer, what kind of assumptions am I making? Is my gender playing a role? Is my socioeconomic status? Is my level of education? Is my sexual preference? These are questions that don't always yield neat or orderly answers, but I've shifted how I present this kind of information, which positions me as a standard audience member, this consider your audience, I need more information. Now I try to frame it differently. So I try to present this power imbalance very explicitly with my students. And when we talk about audience, we have a conversation about who is centered and who's not. And then the students as writers can decide what they want to do to handle the situation and the issue. And they can make writing choices based on what the information is that we've given them.
So we have presented you with two teaching situations that illustrate these first two stages of our reflection-based process. And now it's your chance to reflect on your own practices with your temporary accountability partners, meaning the members of your breakout group. Heather Zitlaw is going to help us by assigning you guys to some breakout rooms. And when you're in the breakout rooms, we want you to do the following things. First, take a few moments to introduce each other and get to know each other a bit. And then we've given you 2 questions about classroom practices. You can feel free to discuss both questions or choose one of the questions to talk about. And Heather is also going to copy and paste those 2 questions into the chat box, because once you go into your breakout room, you will not be able to see this whole room slide that we have. So Heather, if I could ask you to go ahead and copy and paste those into the chat box and help our colleagues find their ways into their breakout rooms.
I'm copying the questions now, and I have breakout rooms set to go. There should be 3 or 4 people in each room. And Heather and Julie, I did not assign you to rooms. Is that, or do you want to be assigned to rooms? I should have asked you that earlier. Sorry.
So we'll stay out here. And if anyone has a question, we can go in and to help with that.
Okay, questions are in the chat, and I'm going to open the rooms now.
So you should be seeing an invitation on your screen asking you to join a room, and please join your colleagues and enjoy your conversation. You'll have about 8 minutes.
Okay, looks like everyone's in their room.
Thank
You want me to time 8 minutes, or I can do that?
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
For the purposes of recording, can we pause the recording now so that there's not this dead space?
Yes, that's a great idea.
So we'll start welcoming people back, and somebody help me recognize when we are all back in the major room.
Looks like everybody should be back now.
Okay, great. So I'm sure you have some thoughts and reactions or insights or questions. So please, if you would like for us to talk about these as a group, feel free to make comments in the chat box, and we'll discuss your reactions and thoughts after we present scenario 3, which is what we will talk about next. So the third stage is choosing a frame that views students as partners. While we are trained linguists and we bring expert knowledge of how language functions into the classroom, in our framework, we want to recognize that students are likewise experts in a variety of ways.
Okay,
So
I'm going to give it to you.
So most obviously, in the context of Julie and I, of Julie and me, our students are trained lawyers with law degrees from their home countries, and they're lawyers in training in the US legal system. So they are expert in the law, and we are not. As a result, we have moved strongly into a coaching model that honors the partnership between law expert and language expert. But before I start talking about an overview of what this coaching model looks like, I do want to note that partnership view extends beyond this overt law-language relationship. Learners' language learning backgrounds, their life experiences, their broader knowledge of their professional fields, all of these infuse expertness into our students. And in addition, students are experts about their language learning journey, where they are in that journey, what they want from that journey. Not all students want the same experience in the language classroom, and that's okay. That makes each student an expert about his or her journey. And so taking into consideration these thoughts, we have put together what our coaching model looks like. We focus not on reaching an absolute standard, but on development. So we're pushing each student towards the student's goals in light of student readiness. We do not attempt to perfect or copy edit every writing task or all elements of a single writing task. Borrowing from the theory of register variation, which typically focuses on varying one's semantic choices based on the context, we likewise like to reframe errors as informed choices. So in other words, let's consider what positive and negative consequences might arise based on the language choices you are making, helping students consider how consequences vary based on the context. So what this leads to, what these principles look like in practice, is that we tend to do less pen to paper feedback and more frequent side-by-side meetings where we co-read a part of a student's document and we use guiding questions to help the students reach insights about their writing journey. So I'll give you a couple of examples. On a macro level, we start our coaching sessions by putting learners in control. We ask such questions as, what do you want to work on in the document? What's something that's going well? What concerns do you have? Another example at the more micro level of writing choices, we ask students to engage with their texts. So instead of providing them with a command-driven feedback statement like revise your topic sentence, we might ask a student, well, what was the purpose of this paragraph? And do you think your first sentence reflects that purpose? Another example is instead of saying, well, this is the wrong citation format, we say, show me a place in your paper where you are citing to a legal authority. Did you choose to paraphrase or directly quote? And why did you make that choice? So in short, our goal is to move toward a coaching model that allows students to engage individually with us, helping them to recognize that we are in a relationship of partners and that we're not trying to focus on crafting one perfect document, but that we're using each writing encounter to help students develop strategies to allow them to strengthen their expert voice as creative users of English. Now we're going to move into our second breakout room opportunity. And there are several questions on the slide. This time there are 4 questions. And when you go back into your discussion rooms, we'd like for you to discuss as many of these as you have time for. Heather Zitlaw will once again send you to the rooms, and she's going to copy and paste the questions into the chat box so that you have access to them in the rooms.
Okay, I'll open the rooms in just a moment. I think we had 1 or 2 people leave and 1 or 2 people join since our last breakout room. So you'll be in the same room, but you may see someone missing or you may see a new person added to your room. And did you tell them how much time they'll have for this one?
So yeah, you have about 10 minutes for this discussion.
Okay, I just copy the questions into the chat and I'll send you now to breakout rooms.
So once again, just click on those accept buttons and have a great time in your discussion room. Maria and Patricia, I see that you haven't joined yet. Are you having any difficulties we can help you with?
Oh, no difficulties. Thank you. I just can't participate in the discussion right now.
So Heather, we might want to reassign Megan.
I'm just thinking that. Maria, are you able to join the room with Megan, or shall I move Megan? Otherwise she's by herself in room 3.
Poor Megan.
I'll go ahead and move Megan.
Yes.
Oh no, Maria's in there. Good now. Okay.
Oh.
Okay, I'm going to pause the recording again.
Recording in progress.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. I'm just going to give everyone a chance. I think we're all here. I hope you had some thought-provoking, productive conversations. We will have a chance for a Q&A in a moment. I'm just going to wrap us up and give us time to ask questions. You are welcome to put questions in the chat. You can also, you'll have a chance to also talk if you want to. So we just wanted to thank you for coming. I know that we're all really busy, and it's just thank you for taking the time to be with us. We really look forward to hearing your reflections because we're still learning. And as we said, we want to co-create this presentation with you. Our email addresses are there. You're welcome to contact us if you have any questions or comments or thoughts. And Heather Zitlaw is going to put the PDF in the chat so you can have access to this presentation, the handout, the materials. Here are some references and here are some picture credits. And I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen. And we have about 6-7 minutes for questions. So I'll just open up the floor. You're welcome to unmute yourself. You're also really welcome to put it in the chat either way. Any thoughts, feedback, comments, reflections, insights? And silence is okay too. Sometimes it's good just to think for a moment.
I think this is a really important topic in terms of facing the implicit biases that we have. Just in the past year or so, I've been forced to really look at where my biases are in terms of language and culture and just all the stuff that having a multicultural, multilingual classroom does. So it's good to have a way of focusing in on that.
Excellent.
It often seems that I've been doing this for 20 years, and you sometimes get into patterns that you don't even realize you've gotten into. And so it can take either something catastrophic happening or just world events happening or just life experiences happening that can shake you up and help you realize what you want to make, what you need to unpack and take a better look at.
I wonder if you can talk for a second about that tension between, you said you'd like to focus on development rather than standards, which I think depending on, I don't know what teaching context everyone here is in. I mean, especially I'm thinking of K-12 teachers where standards are such a it's almost like you don't have that option as a teacher. How do you address that tension, or what advice could you give towards that?
Well, I think it's an excellent question. We talked about it as we were putting this presentation together, that sometimes you don't have a choice whether or not you have to meet a standard or not, that it's imposed on you from the outside. And I think that the key is the approach to those standards. And honestly, I think having an honest conversation with your students about these are the standards that we need to meet, but why? Why these standards? And even with young children, you can say they're arbitrary. You still need to meet them, but it's not that these are the be all end all. This doesn't mean that if you don't meet them, it says something about you as a student or as a learner. It's just having that conversation sometimes about these necessary evils, maybe. Did you have any thoughts, Heather, that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I would just reinforce what you were saying in the sense of it's not pretending that it's somehow neutral, that the standard is somehow neutral and unflawed. And there's different ways you have that conversation depending on your context, but oftentimes just making that, allowing students to talk about that or understand that or engage in conversation about that can help with that tension. And, if you're using rubrics can often be, it's how you frame it. We can discuss the rubric as where we are in the journey and, where, rather than this is where you must get, Like rather than starting with it as a punitive endpoint, framing it as it helps guide us in the journey.
I have a thought on that. It's related. I'm reminded that my son was in his when he was growing up. Their school had a whole language approach, but they modified it somewhat so that, for instance, they became they were really encouraged to write a lot. But the teacher, particular teacher, but all the teachers in general had an approach that gave the students the tools to know what the standards were, and she identified them specifically. She said, okay, this is the way we write dates, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm thinking of the first grade teacher. Mm-hmm. But they became great writers because they could grow in writing as they were able to just do that freely. But then the teacher just made sure that they got those standards, but clearly identified. So I thought it was very effective.
It's kind of interesting that standards or rubrics were sort of seen as a solution to a problem, as a way to help learners understand the components of what went into a certain successful speech event or written event. And they have in some ways become the same evil that they were trying to fix. So it's all part of the journey for educators.
So there is a question in the chat if we would share an example of our rubric. Ours is very specific to our context, so I'm not sure that it would be that useful. It's about scholarly writing in a legal setting, but our rubric is very similar to other rubrics that you might see where we kind of work backwards in a backward design way, thinking about what the objectives are, and then we teach towards those objectives and we have them. We're lucky we don't actually have to use a rubric, and we use it very differently than we used to. So we used to fill out every single box, and I was thinking back 10 or 15 years ago, I used to put scores next to each one and add them up. Now I do things where I'll say, I'm going to focus on X section for this assignment, and I'm just going to make comments on how you're doing, and we can talk about them. So we handle them quite differently.
It's like they look the same, but
yeah,
how you engage with them is different. We've stripped numbers off of them, percentage, it's like there's no A, B, C designation. And that is a part of the freedom that we have in the context in which we teach as well. But oftentimes it's not about what it looks like on the surface. It still looks the same. It's about how you present it and how you engage with it, and how you invite students to challenge it. You can also even co-create rubrics, of course. So I think it's more about how you present it than what it actually ends up looking like.
And someone made a comment, Karen said that student-generated rubrics can be very organic as well. I'm going to actually close our conversation because I know that we are running out of time, and I think that Heather Zitlaw, our wonderful host, has just an announcement or two to make.
Oh, and one question that was asked was about links. If you open the PDF, the links are live, so you can click on the links to take you to those resources.
So once again, that PDF is in the chat. If you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and take that file now before you leave the room. Also, I think it will be posted on Canvas. So you maybe access this through the conference program. That's fine. But if you want to get materials afterwards or join an ongoing discussion, you will need to join the Canvas site, which was also sent out yesterday. So my first announcement, or first thing I'd like to say, is to join me in thanking Dr. Lake and Dr. Weger for this excellent session this morning. And then I have a quick reminder, and I just posted in the chat a link to our conference survey. So we're hoping that at the end of the day, you will take a few moments to fill that out and let us know how things went. Thank you all for coming. The next sessions start at 11. So take a few moments for grabbing a cup of coffee and then either coming back to this room or moving to another room if that's where you'll join the next session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much.